The day Emma met her stepmother. The July sun was blazing down on the quiet streets of Willow Creek, a small Texas town that never kept secrets for long. Emma Davidson, just 16, but with eyes older than her years, sat on the front steps, nervously twisting a friendship bracelet she'd made a summer ago. Her dad, Samuel, paced inside the house. He'd told Emma they'd have visitors by noon, but hadn't explained more. Emma's mother had been gone half a lifetime, and she carried that shadow everywhere she went. Her father, always distracted by work as a mechanic, tried his best, but home had felt incomplete for years. So when Samuel quietly announced he was seeing someone new, a woman named Margaret Maggie Sanders, Emma's mind had swirled with doubt and a touch of fear. That afternoon, a silver sedan pulled into the dusty driveway. From the passenger side stepped Maggie, immediately commanding the world's attention, with her honey blonde hair, red lipstick, and an energy that filled the air. She wore a crisp blouse and perfectly pressed jeans, her entire look shouting, "Big city," more than small town. Trailing beside Maggie was a girl about Emma's age, Kelly. She looked down at her shoes, a suitcase trailing behind, dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She didn't lift her eyes to meet Emma's, but Emma sensed the same uncertainty mirrored in her own heart. Samuel rushed out, smile too wide for his wrinkled face. "Emma, I want you to meet Maggie. And this is Kelly, her daughter." The awkward silence that followed was thick. The birds seemed to hush in anticipation. Maggie extended her hand, nails painted a sophisticated mauve, and flashed a smile too dazzling to be entirely real. "Emma, I've heard so much about you," Maggie said, voice warm and practiced. "I'm so happy to finally meet you. We're going to be one big family." Emma shook her hand, but the touch was cold and brief. She glanced at Kelly, who offered a shy nod, but kept her distance. Even then, Emma felt an invisible wall going up between herself and these strangers who had entered her world so suddenly. Inside, Maggie surveyed the living room with an appraising eye and began offering suggestions about rearranging the furniture. Emma's room, Maggie said, would be just perfect for two girls to share. But Emma saw Kelly's hopeful glance and felt a pang of confusion and loss. Within hours, they had become a family on paper, but in Emma's heart, everything grew more uncertain by the minute. That first day set the stage. Smiles on the surface, tension underneath. Emma could already tell that life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. She promised herself she'd never forget what it felt like to watch those strangers walk up the path, a memory as vivid as the summer sun above her. The role of the stand-in in the family. From the moment Maggie and Kelly moved into the Davidson house, the air changed. Emma, once accustomed to her quiet routines, suddenly felt like an outsider in her own home. Maggie, with her perfectly styled hair and assertive voice, quickly made it clear who was in charge. Every family meal, every decision about the living room arrangement, every plan for weekend chores. Maggie took the lead, often leaving Samuel nodding along in agreement out of exhaustion from his long hours at the mechanic's shop. At first, Emma tried to be welcoming, even hopeful. She thought maybe sharing her space with Kelly, who seemed just as out of place, might bring them closer. But Maggie had different ideas. Whenever something went wrong, a broken vase, a missed homework assignment, even a forgotten chore, it was Emma's name Maggie called out with impatience. "Emma, how could you be so careless?" Or, "Emma, please set a better example for Kelly." Kelly's mistakes were quietly forgiven or explained away. If Kelly was late for dinner, Maggie would simply smile and say, she had a tough day. But if Emma was 5 minutes late, it was a lecture about respect. Emma felt invisible, and yet painfully in the spotlight at the same time. She became the family stand-in for blame, the one Maggie chose to bear the weight of Kelly's mishaps and her own frustrations. It wasn't just the chores or the small accidents. Whenever Samuel wasn't around, Maggie's instructions grew sharper. Emma was made responsible for any conflict between the two girls, and Kelly seemed to fold under her mother's expectations, disappearing whenever Emma needed an ally. The only place Emma could escape was the old treehouse at the edge of their yard, where she'd fill her journal with words she never dared say aloud. Over time, Emma's sense of injustice grew. She wondered why she was always picked last, why her efforts weren't seen, and why she was made the scapegoat for a family that looked perfect from the outside. The more Maggie played favorites, the more Emma drifted inward, learning to rely on her own strength and resolve, determined not to become invisible, even as the role of the stand-in threatened to erase who she truly was, a lonely youth and her dreams. From as early as she could remember, Emma's life had been marked by a quiet struggle. She learned to move quietly through her own home, avoiding the creaky board on the hallway floor, tiptoeing past the bedroom where Maggie conducted her late-night phone calls. Emma was smart. She'd always been an honor student, but those achievements faded into the background at home. Her victories at the school science fair or her place on the debate team meant little in Maggie's eyes. Instead, Emma's world was reduced to an endless loop of chores, schoolwork, and the prickly thorns of being the stand-in in someone else's family script. School became Emma's lifeline, but even there, she felt the weight of being different. She wasn't one of the popular kids who posted pictures from lake weekends or wore the right kind of brand-name jeans, but she did make a few friends who valued honesty and quiet loyalty. Her best friend, Daisy, was the kind of person who understood how to listen and brought slices of lemon cake from home when she knew Emma had a tough day. Still, Emma guarded her feelings fiercely, reluctant to let anyone too close, lest they see how bruised she sometimes felt inside. Most evenings, after dinner, in an exhausting round of chores, Emma would retreat to the treehouse, journal in hand. Her entries filled notebook after notebook, confessions, plans, sketches of what her life could be. She wrote about traveling across America, seeing California's golden beaches or New York's shimmering skyline. She dreamed of earning a scholarship to some distant university, building a future on her own terms. Her notebook pages became secret blueprints for escape, sometimes wild and fantastical, other times heartbreakingly practical, mapping out course loads and tuition costs. She knew her father cared, but after years of weariness, Samuel was often absent, even when he was physically in the room. Their conversations grew shorter as Emma grew older. In time, silences filled the spaces where affection once lived. Loneliness clung to Emma. She watched Kelly transform under Maggie's careful attention, always somehow more at ease, more accepted. Emma longed for that kind of maternal warmth, but whenever she tried to reach out, she found herself met with indifference, or worse, quiet competition. Kelly never outwardly bullied her, but there was always the sense of two different teams playing under one roof. Emma was fiercely proud, too proud sometimes, and she wouldn't beg for love or approval. Still, deep down, she wanted what every teenager craved: to be seen, to be chosen, to feel like she mattered. Despite the heartache, Emma fostered a stubborn hope. Maybe, she often mused, late at night, this was just a phase. Maybe families could heal, given enough time. Sometimes, after the others slept, she snuck outside to gaze up at the Texas stars, whispering her fears and her dreams to the sky. She wondered if anyone would ever hear them, or if she'd have to become her own hero. In these quiet moments, Emma's dreams shone a little brighter than her loneliness. The world felt wide and full of possibilities, provided she could hang on long enough. She poured her frustrations into art, sketching dragonflies and wildflowers, painting sunsets with watercolors filched from school. Each project was a small rebellion against the invisibility forced on her at home. With every line and brushstroke, she claimed back a piece of herself. Someday, she told herself, her story would turn. She would leave Willow Creek, create the kind of life where she mattered, and maybe one day return to show those who doubted her the strength she had discovered alone. Cracks that could not be hidden. Emma's 18th birthday passed without fanfare. Just another quiet meal at the dinner table. Maggie's smile a little too stiff, Kelly head down as always, and her father exhausted from another long shift. But with adulthood came a sharper sense of awareness. Emma began to notice the subtle and not so subtle fissures running through the illusion of her patched-together family. It began with whispers at night, the low rumble of Maggie's voice behind the closed door of the master bedroom, sometimes agitated, sometimes pleading. Emma often tiptoed to the top of the stairs, holding her breath, catching fragments of conversations she wasn't meant to hear. Talk of lawyers, debts, and something she couldn't quite name that sent icy shivers down her spine. She found strange envelopes in Maggie's purse, sealed and heavy, with addresses far from Willow Creek. Several times, Maggie would leave the house at odd hours, returning just before dawn, her cheeks flushed, her smile brittle, her perfume just a little too strong. Emma's intuition was sharp. Nothing escaped her when she truly looked. She cataloged every oddity, the couple of broken vases swept up and gone before morning, the expensive jewelry Maggie occasionally wore that Emma never saw purchased, the careful way Maggie managed her and Kelly's accounts, always just enough for groceries and bills, never enough for extras. Kelly stayed quiet through it all, her eyes flickering at Emma, only when they crossed paths in the hallway. Once, Emma tried to ask, "Is Mom okay?" But Kelly withdrew, shutting her door, radio up loud to drown out anything beyond those four walls. The tension in the house became a second skin. Arguments between Maggie and Samuel simmered low, surfacing in sharp voices over bills or the future, or in the icy silences that followed. Her father grew more distant, often retreating to his garage late into the evenings. Emma became almost invisible, a careful observer on the periphery of her own life. One Saturday afternoon, curiosity got the better of her. Emma waited until the house was empty, her heart pounding as she rummaged through the desk in Maggie's home office. Among stacks of old tax forms and household receipts, she found a hidden folder labeled with a legal firm's name she'd never heard before. Inside were documents, court filings, letters from attorneys, and a photo, grainy and marked with ink, of Maggie in another city, standing next to a man Emma did not recognize. The letters spoke in cautious legalese about investigations, settlements, and threats of exposure. Emma's breath caught, a rush of fear and vindication. Maggie was hiding something. Suddenly, the chilly stiffness in her stepmother's eyes made sense. The protective obsession, the strict rules, the way Kelly was always treated, like some fragile secret. Emma wondered what her place had ever been if Maggie had built so much of her life on deception. Still, Emma hesitated. Should she confront Maggie with what she'd found? Tell her father right away? Or would all of Willow Creek soon know their family's mess? With whispers, even the summer wind couldn't sweep away. For weeks, Emma carried the secret close, letting it gnaw away every quiet moment. She watched Maggie with new eyes, seeing through the careful smiles and honeyed reassurances. At times, she almost pitied her stepmother. Whatever had happened to make her so desperate, so fearful? Finally, late one night, the strains were too much to bear. Emma woke to the sound of muffled sobbing. She padded down the hallway, pausing outside the living room door. On the other side, Kelly and Maggie sat together, arms around each other, both faces streaked with tears. Maggie was pleading, "It's all I could do to protect us, to keep you safe." In that moment, Emma realized the cracks weren't just in the family's surface. They ran through every heart under that roof. Secrets, shame, silent battles. The bonds in her family were thin, stretched, near breaking. But beneath them, vulnerability breathed. Emma felt her own pain, her longing for truth and belonging, reflected in those whispered midnight confessions. Uncertainty loomed, but the path was clearer now. Maggie's secret would change everything, and Emma, no longer the invisible stand-in, would have to decide who she wanted to be when the truth spilled into the light. The secret unveiled. The evening started like any other. Everyone in the house going through the motions, dinner served with polite conversation and glazed smiles. Emma watched Maggie carefully, noting how her stepmother's composure seemed to crack when her phone vibrated insistently on the counter. Kelly seemed anxious too, glancing between her mother and her stepsister, as if she knew the air itself was charged. That night, as wind rattled the old willow outside, Emma sat awake in her room. The folder she discovered weighed heavily in her desk drawer. She turned the photo over in her hands, reading again the legal letters she could barely process. Accusations of financial fraud, references to a court order, and repeated warnings about revealing the past. The fire of injustice began to smolder in Emma's chest. For all these years, she'd borne the brunt of Maggie's cold judgment and hostility, made the scapegoat for every mishap and misdeed, all while Maggie hid behind the shield of adult authority and a facade of propriety. Emma knew then that the web of secrets threatened not just her dignity, but the livelihood of her whole family. She thought of Samuel, loyal and exhausted, who had no idea the woman he loved might be hiding a criminal record and a life of running from consequences. She pictured Kelly, curious whether her silence was learned helplessness or a desperate effort to protect the only parent she had left. The next morning, Emma confronted Kelly in the backyard, determined to get answers. "I know about your mom," she said quietly, handing Kelly the photograph. Kelly's face went pale, then flushed red. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Everything she's done, she did it to protect us. She was in trouble, but she's paid her dues. She was so scared we'd lose everything if anyone found out." The conversation brought equal parts clarity and heartache. Kelly confessed that she knew more than she'd ever let on, that the tough days Maggie excused for her weren't ordinary struggles, but the impact of a life lived on eggshells, always fearful that the truth would emerge. "She's different with me because I knew what was at stake. I couldn't lose her again," Kelly admitted, eyes shining with tears. Emma's anger and bitterness softened, replaced by something more complicated. There was guilt. Had she ever been too quick to blame Kelly, too hardened by her own pain to notice the other girl's suffering? But there was also resolve. If anyone needed to do the right thing, to put a stop to the lying, it was Emma. She steeled herself for what had to come next. That Sunday, Emma waited until the family was gathered around the breakfast table. She placed the folder between Maggie and Samuel, her hands steady, despite her thundering heart. "I can't carry this alone anymore," she said, looking her stepmother dead in the eye. "I know everything, and Dad deserves to hear it too." The fallout was immediate. Samuel's confusion turned to disbelief, then grief. Maggie's mask cracked completely. She tried to justify her decisions, plead her case, explain the chain of desperation that led her from one bad choice to another. There were tears, both Maggie's and Kelly's. Emma felt her own tremble, but held her ground, speaking quietly but firmly about every year she'd spent carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. For a few wretched days, the family teetered on the brink of collapse. There were visits from lawyers, tense phone calls, and trips to the sheriff's office in neighboring towns. Under legal pressure, Maggie finally confessed to her previous crimes in front of Samuel and a family attorney. The consequences weren't as severe as Emma feared. Maggie's case had been adjudicated in another state, and though judgment lingered, the court agreed nobody in Willow Creek was in danger. Still, the trust fractured beyond easy repair. Emma experienced an odd freedom in the aftermath, a sense that the truth, though painful, was the only foundation strong enough for hope. She saw Samuel look at her differently, no longer just a girl trying to hold things together, but a young woman with principle and grit. Kelly, after weeks of avoiding contact, quietly thanked Emma one afternoon. "You did the right thing, even if it hurt. Maybe now we all get a second chance," she said, voice wavering. The secret's unveiling didn't mend everything overnight, but for the first time, Emma felt her invisible burden lifting. She'd confronted the ghosts that haunted her family and found the courage not just to survive, but to insist on the honesty everyone deserved. Emma stands up for justice. After the storm of secrets had swept through the Davidson household, I found myself lingering in a new, tense quiet. The truth about Maggie's past had carved a jagged fault line down the middle of our lives, dividing what we thought we knew from what we could never unknow. Dad barely spoke, retreating to the garage more than ever, his eyes haunted by confusion and heartbreak. Kelly tiptoed around the edges of the house, skittish as a fawn, while Maggie's ever-confident posture had deflated, her movements smaller, her voice softer and apologetic. For a few days, it felt as if we were orbiting around a crater that might swallow us whole. Yet in that void, something new began to take root inside me, a sense of resolve unlike anything I'd ever felt. Maybe it was anger at first, a burning hot frustration at years of carrying blame and walking on eggshells. But that anger soon transformed into something clearer, a fierce determination that I would not let this cycle define me. I knew that if I didn't stand up now, the years of being the stand-in, the caretaker, the invisible child, they would mark who I was forever. I was no longer that helpless girl staring out the window and dreaming of escape. I had survived betrayal and indifference, and I was ready to reclaim my own narrative. Steeling myself, I collected the documents and all the evidence I'd found about Maggie's history. Letters, receipts, that infamous photo, and every bit of paperwork I'd discovered. I reached out to Ms. Rowe, my guidance counselor at school, who'd always had a gentle smile and the sharpest intuition of anyone I knew. I didn't tell her everything at first, only that I felt unsafe with secrets in the house, and that there were legal issues my father deserved to understand. After our second meeting, Ms. Rowe offered to connect me with a local lawyer she trusted, Mrs. Garrison, a woman known throughout Willow Creek for fighting stubbornly for her clients, no matter how small the case. I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared. The night before our first legal appointment, I lay awake, my thoughts chasing each other in circles. What if this upended my dad's fragile hold on happiness? What if bringing these secrets to light only brought more pain? But deep down, I knew the alternative. Letting more lies calcify in our lives would be worse. The next few weeks turned into a parade of tense phone calls, meetings behind closed doors, and endless paperwork. Mrs. Garrison took the time to listen, really listen, to everything I'd witnessed. Her questions were incisive, but never cruel. She validated my feelings, telling me I was courageous for stepping forward. With her support, we reached out to the local police, not with any intent to punish for the sake of punishment, but to create a record and ensure the safety of everyone in the house. When Maggie was finally confronted in an official capacity, she wept openly. A part of me almost recoiled. I had spent so long seeing her as the architect of my pain that her vulnerability felt complicated, uncomfortable. But I stayed steady. I spoke about every instance of unjust blame, every moment I'd been gaslit or sidelined. Dad sat quietly, his hands trembling. But as I spoke, he seemed to grow taller, as if finally understanding the depth of my burden. Of course, there were consequences, but not the ones that play out in TV dramas. Maggie's past indiscretions had mostly run their legal course years earlier, but community service and restitution payments needed to be finalized. She was banned from handling family finances until she'd proven herself to the court. Dad insisted on marriage counseling, and the authorities insisted on parental oversight for Kelly's academic and psychological needs. Most important to me, boundaries were redrawn. No more shared bedrooms, no more unspoken expectations that I bear the weight of Maggie's mistakes. The town gossips inevitably caught wind of our ordeal. Willow Creek was too small for secrets. There were side eyes at the grocery store and whispers at church. But for the first time in my life, I held my head high. My story was mine to own, not to hide in shame. School became my anchor again. I dove into my studies, applied for scholarships with a renewed sense of purpose, and even shared my experience with a school journalist for a piece on resilience. Friends, old and new, stopped by with casseroles, words of encouragement, and, in Daisy's case, her legendary lemon cake. Dad slowly came back to me after the initial panic faded. We took walks in the early morning before school, where he apologized for his failings and asked me to help him communicate better with me and with Kelly. We rebuilt trust in small ways, repairing the treehouse together, sharing quiet laughs about old times, and even attending counseling sessions as father and daughter. I found peace, not in any apology from Maggie, but in the knowledge that I had spoken up for myself, changing my own reality for the better. My relationship with Kelly evolved too, despite the awkwardness. There were moments of quiet solidarity, shared Netflix nights, and cautious attempts at honesty. I recognized in her the same scars, different stories, similar wounds. We agreed to be kinder to each other, even if friendship might always be a careful balancing act. Standing up for justice was not about revenge. It was about rewriting the rules of my world, refusing to let silence and blame drown out the person I wanted to become. I learned I could survive heartbreak, unmask deception, and still move forward with hope. It would never be easy, but at last I walked into each day knowing I was not a stand-in anymore. I was, finally, the main character in my own story, Emma's new beginning. After the storms and secrets that once threatened to pull my family apart, something remarkable began to take shape. A possibility I hadn't dared to imagine. My own new beginning. It didn't arrive with fanfare or a sudden, cinematic reversal of fortune. Rather, it came quietly, like the soft pink glow that gently chases away the Texas night. From the edges, then all at once. Still, there was nothing simple about starting over. Some days, the past felt as close as my own shadow. But with every step forward, I felt my sense of hope stretch just a bit further, leading me toward the kind of future I'd always drawn in the margins of my notebooks. At first, I found it strange to truly claim space in my own story. The house was no longer ruled by tense silences or the need to tiptoe around fraught secrets. Instead, the air felt lighter, each room humming with the possibility of peace. Dad and I talked more, really talked, about our hurts and our plans. Sometimes the words stumbled out awkwardly, but even that awkwardness felt honest and safe. We shared Saturday mornings in the garage, fixing up an old truck, our hands grimy, but our spirits a little brighter, reminding me that love is sometimes more about small, steady gestures than grand declarations. I knew, deep down, that my new beginning couldn't be bound to the narrow streets of Willow Creek forever. All those years of late-night dreaming in my treehouse, those secret journal entries about adventure and freedom, I was finally ready to make them real. Applying to college felt at first like tossing a letter into the wind. I spent nights at the kitchen table researching scholarships, nervously pressing submit on application after application, afraid I'd hear nothing but rejections. But for once, luck, maybe a little mixed with stubbornness and hard work, was on my side. The day the acceptance letter from a university in California arrived, I could hardly breathe. I clutched the envelope, terrified to read its contents, my hands shaking so hard Dad had to steady them. The moment I saw the word, congratulations, tears slid down my cheeks, not just for the victory, but for every lonely hour and every time I'd almost given up. That single letter, with its embossed crest and formal signature, meant more than an escape. It was a validation, a beacon calling me forward. Preparing for the move felt like an unraveling of girlhood. I sorted through old keepsakes, friendship bracelets, contest ribbons, stacks of worn journals filled with secrets and promises. Packing meant more than filling boxes. It was an act of sifting through memories, honoring the pain and the perseverance that had brought me this far. Even so, I was determined that this next chapter would be written in bold strokes, not shadowed by regret. Things with Kelly evolved too. After the chaos of Maggie's secret, our relationship turned from wary rivalry to something gentler. We began to treat each other like survivors of a long storm, sometimes sitting together in companionable silence, sometimes quietly checking in with a single glance. She helped me pack, folding my favorite shirts with care, sliding notes into the pockets, little reminders that I was not as alone as I once felt. I realized our shared pain had woven a tentative, fragile trust, a bridge I hadn't known I needed. As for Dad, he admitted he was scared to let me go, scared I'd go so far I might never look back. But I promised him what I knew was true. I was not running away. I was running toward something. In the months before I left, Willow Creek seemed to shrink and expand all at once, becoming both a place I cherished and a reminder of how much bigger the world was beyond its limits. Maggie's place in my life became more complicated. There were no dramatic reconciliations, no tearful, movie-style absolutions. She apologized, awkwardly but sincerely, for the burdens she had placed on me, for the way her secrets chipped away at my heart. I couldn't offer instant forgiveness, not with everything so fresh, but we found a sort of armistice. She respected my boundaries, and I gave her the small kindness of honest conversation when I could manage it. With time, I hoped something healthier might take root between us, though I knew healing would be an ongoing process, not a one-time event. The last summer before college was one of subtle transformation. I filled it with simple rituals. Morning runs beneath the early sun, iced tea and laughter with Daisy and friends, scribbling final dreams and fears in my journals. I sat with Kelly on the roof to watch the stars, learning that forgiveness sometimes looks like just showing up, night after night, with patience and open ears. I mowed lawns and waited tables, every tip going toward my travel fund, determined to land in California on my own terms. When the day of departure finally arrived, I expected tears and anxiety, but instead felt a strange buoyancy. The whole town seemed to hold its breath as Dad tightened his arms around me for a farewell hug. His voice thick as he told me, "I'm proud of you, Emma. Wherever you go, you always belong here. But you don't owe anyone an apology for chasing your future." Stepping onto the plane, I felt a surge of anticipation. Fear and excitement tangled together like the bracelets I wore on my wrist. California was a promise on the horizon. New friends, new streets, a campus pulsing with possibility. I was terrified, of course, of getting lost, of failing, of being more invisible than before. But I also carried an undeniable resilience, tempered by the challenges I had survived. I remembered every night at the treehouse, staring up at the stars and whispering my hopes to the sky, and felt a quiet certainty grow inside me. Settling into my new dorm room, I pinned up postcards and art, supplies, leaving space on the walls for new memories. Orientation week was a blur of name tags, unfamiliar faces, and frantic introductions. But with each passing day, it became easier to breathe deeply, to introduce myself not as the stand-in or the scapegoat, but simply as Emma, someone with her own story, her own voice, her own dreams finally within reach. At night, as the California breeze moved through my window, I wrote letters home. Some were to Dad, long, rambling missives about classes, city lights, and moments of homesickness. Others were for Kelly, sharing memories and encouragement, nervous about how we'd stay connected with miles between us. I even wrote to Maggie once, telling her I wished her peace and growth on her own journey. Each letter felt like planting a seed, proof of my continued care, but also a record of just how far I'd come. I discovered new dimensions of freedom, sitting on the beach with new friends, eating midnight burritos, joining the university's art collective, finally letting my watercolors speak on canvas for others to see. I learned the power and vulnerability of starting over, when nobody knew your history and every first meeting was a blank page. I stumbled, yes, but with each misstep, I found kindness from strangers, from professors, from myself. Slowly, I began to understand that healing wasn't a linear path. It was a looping, meandering journey, with setbacks and sudden leaps. There were days when guilt or longing would tighten my chest, nights when loneliness crept up in the quiet between new experiences. But I let myself feel it all, trusting that even the hard moments were temporary. With every challenge, I became a little braver, a little less afraid to claim joy, connection, and pride in what I'd overcome. By the end of my first year, the narrative threads of my life no longer revolved around pain or secrets, but wove together celebration and self-discovery. I made peace with the shadows of Willow Creek, carrying their lessons, but no longer their burdens. I returned home for holidays, not as an outsider, but as someone who had carved out her place, both in her hometown and the world beyond. One summer afternoon, sitting with Dad on the old porch swing, I realized I was no longer waiting for someone to name my worth. "I see you, Emma," he said, echoing the validation I'd long craved. It felt real now, not because he said it, but because I believed it deep down. Looking forward, my dreams felt endless again. Maybe I would travel abroad for a semester, or paint a mural in town. Maybe I'd mentor other students who found themselves shouldering hurts that didn't belong to them. Whatever the specifics, I knew my life belonged to me, and every step of my journey, from stand-in to survivor to self-advocate, had shaped a future filled with hope, strength, and the possibility of love. More than anything, I promised myself to keep living with courage and curiosity, to let my story unfold without apology, and to reach back, whenever I could, to others following a similar path. Even on days when doubts whispered, I reminded myself, I am not just a product of the storms I have weathered, but the builder of every sunrise that comes after. That's what a new beginning is, after all. Not a clean slate, but the beautiful, imperfect canvas you create from all you've survived. My name is Emma, and this is just the start.